I'm Nicole Holcomb, attorney by day and podcaster by night, a former educator, school counselor, and administrator, and mom to a 9-year-old daughter with dyslexia, who loves all things Harry Potter, Minecraft, and science. A few years ago, she was identified with dyslexia, and our life seemed to turn upside down for a while, quite literally. I created the Dyslexia Mom Life podcast to help you navigate the upside down journey of dyslexia. You got this. If you're wanting to thrive as a mom in this dyslexia journey, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hey friend, welcome to episode 55 of the Dyslexia Mom Life podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Holcomb, here to educate you on dyslexia and coach you to find clarity to develop a blueprint to equip your child to thrive with dyslexia. I want to start out by sharing a little personal story. When our daughter was very young, we struggled to understand her. There were some words that she just couldn't pronounce, and there were other times that she couldn't remember quite how to pronounce a specific word. She would get kind of hung up on the word sometimes. I have to tell you, this was really hard for us to watch. It's really actually hard to share with people openly like this as well. But I want you to know that you're not alone and that many of us have been on a similar journey. So we would watch her get frustrated. And, sometimes she would just give up. She would just give up asking for whatever it was she wanted, or she would just be really frustrated trying to talk to us. And I can remember one time in particular that sticks out in my mind. My daughter's always been a picky eater as well. And I can remember that there was one time she was asking my mom for something to eat. And I just remember that she told me later that they went round and around struggling for her to pronounce this word. And so my mom said, explain it to me. So she started describing to my mom what it was she was trying to tell her she wanted. She started describing, it being sweet. It was square. It was a dessert, something we had after dinner. She just started describing all these things, the color of it. And finally, my mom was so excited to figure out that she was saying chess square. It was not coming out chess square. And so they immediately went to the kitchen and made some. And she was so excited to finally kind of be able to kind of figure that piece out. But there were many times when we could not figure out what she was saying. And she would become very frustrated with us. And she would become very frustrated with herself. So for many years, we thought that we were really dealing with some type of speech articulation concern. But that obviously was not the case. It would be a few years before we identified her as dyslexic. Although, there are screeners that we could have used earlier. Dyslexia was not on the educators that we worked with. There was not on their radar. And it was definitely not on our radar. So today, for those of you that are starting out on this journey, or you're just trying to figure out if your child is struggling to read because they're dyslexic, I wanted to share with you some signs of dyslexia. And these signs are research-based. They come from the International Dyslexia Association and from the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity. That is headed up by Dr. Shaywitz, and Sally Shaywitz also has a book called Overcoming Dyslexia. And so I pulled these pieces from a couple different places, but they're all research-based. And Dr. Shaywitz is also a physician and a scientist. And so I will link all the information that I talk about today in the show notes. You can get copies of anything that you hear today on the show notes at dyslexiamomlife.com/episode 55. Let's start out at the beginning. Let's start out with the preschool years. So I was just talking to you about those a few minutes ago for us, but let me describe to you some of the things that you might be seeing as a parent. So during those preschool years, sometimes children will struggle and really have trouble learning common nursery rhymes. They may have trouble learning or even remembering the names of the letters in the alphabet. And they seem to be unable to recognize letters in their own name. There have been several people on the podcast who are now adults that have said they really struggle with this at the beginning, actually writing their own name. And they may mispronounce words that are familiar, and they say also that sometimes children will persistently use what they call baby talk. And Children at this age, this preschool age, they don't recognize They don't recognize rhyming patterns like cat, bat, mat, hat, those types of things. And 2, there is a family history of reading and or spelling difficulties because dyslexia is hereditary. It runs in families, but if you're not aware of that, you might not be watching for that. But if you know there's a history of your family, maybe someone in your family was not diagnosed or identified, but you know that there are people in your family, maybe yourself, that really struggled to learn to read and to spell. So that's another sign to look for. As we go into the very early years of education and look at kindergarten and first grade, some of the difficulties you may see are things like reading errors that show up that have really no connection to the sounds of the letters on the page. I can remember that with our daughter as well. She would just say a word and it didn't even start with the same letter. It was completely something different. And one of the examples Dr. Shaywitz gives is, your child may say puppy instead of dog because they see that illustration of a dog on the page, but they actually are not reading the actual text, okay? Or they don't understand that words come apart, that the words are formed through sounds and that they can pull those sounds apart. So they have difficulty figuring that out in that kindergarten and first grade years, which is really when they're working on those skills. And sometimes children will complain about how hard it is to read. And sometimes they will just disappear, or you'll see children start acting out sometimes even at school because they don't want to read. Maybe for us it was, at night we would sit down to read and it was like, I've got to go to the bathroom. And then 2 minutes later, I've got to go to the bathroom. And so she would just kind of disappear on us when it was time to read. Again, there's that history of reading problems. Children cannot sound out even some simple words like cat, cat. They're not able to sound those words, and they don't associate letters with sounds. So with those sounds, like let's say for example the letter B, they see the letter B, but they don't associate B with the B sound, right? So that's some of the things to look for. But on the flip side of that, what might throw you for a loop, which it did for us because, again, was not on our radar, is the strengths. Children, even early on, show amazing strengths because of the way their brain is wired and thinks. So children will show curiosity, many times a great imagination. They're able to figure things out. They really embrace trying new things. And, sometimes they're pretty mature for their age, or their vocabulary may be larger than a typical child of their age. So they may say things and you think, wow, that's really good. And, children also at this age are very creative and really enjoy puzzles. And they have a talent for using building models. Maybe they really get into Lego. I know we did at our house. We did lots of puzzles, I can remember back, and lots of Lego building at this age. And what's also interesting, I think, is at this age, they really do have amazing and just excellent comprehension of stories that are read to them, or stories you may tell them about. And so that may also, although that's we talk about the signs of dyslexia, it can also, to me, throw it off of your radar, so to speak, because they do have this really advanced vocabulary for many children. And then as you're reading stories to them, they remember so much. I mean, you can ask our daughter anything about Harry Potter and she can tell you almost every little bitty detail. She knows way more than we do about those things. So, just pieces like that, they really do have an amazing comprehension. Now, before I move on to second grade, because the next group, we're going to kind of group them in second grade through high school, I want to remind you, this episode is about awareness. It is not about blame. We all miss those signs. When we look back, I miss those signs. Was not on my radar. If you don't know what you're looking for, then how would you know? You're listening today to learn more, and you're seeking to understand. And my friend, that in and of itself is a huge first step. I also would love to ask you for a favor. If you could share this episode with your friends and your family, you could take a screenshot that you're listening to it, or there's usually a little share button in your podcast player that you could send it to, you could email it to a friend, you could send it through social, text it to a friend, because 1 in 5 children are dyslexic. 1 in 5 are said to be dyslexic. And their parents might not even have it on their radar either. So if parents are informed and educated, then they can take the appropriate action. And if we don't start sharing what we know, then how can we help others? You don't have to share any personal information. You can just say, hey, I found this podcast. I'm finding it interesting. I'd love for you to listen and share your thoughts. I just realized that 1 in 5 are said to be dyslexic. And who knows where that conversation may lead. You may start a conversation with someone who is feeling very alone right now and scared to speak up and scared to ask others for help. Just think, would it have made a difference for you? Would it have made a difference if you had seen that in your social media? Would it have made a difference for you if a friend would have sent you a message and said, I just found this podcast and it's very interesting. What do you think about this? 1 in 5. Think about the numbers in a classroom. Think about the number of kids that we're talking about. And many times, again, especially early on, it's just not on our radar. If you have friends where their kids are acting out and there's behavior issues, it could be that they're dyslexic and they just don't know what to do. And so, again, it might not be on their radar. So just, a food for thought. I would love for you to consider sharing this with others, because I do believe that we can really help this community if we educate more people, because it could be someone in their family, it could be someone in their school, it could be someone at their job. And the more understanding that we have, the better place this world's going to be for all of us to live in. So let's jump back into the episode, and now we're going to talk about second grade through high school. So let's dive in first and talking a little bit about reading. Reading is going to be very slow. Students I know this is a large age range, but Dr. Shaywitz kind of groups it in a group like this because she sees similar things. Reading is slow, it's awkward. Students have a hard time acquiring reading skills, because think about it, at this point, your child or your friend's child has not been identified with dyslexia, and so they have not received remediation. They may not even receive the school instruction that they need. So they also have trouble reading unfamiliar words. And so sometimes, like we were talking about earlier, there may be just really wild guesses that they have, and it's really because they cannot sound out the words, so they're really just guessing. And they don't really seem to have a strategy for reading new words. I mean, it's just like, I'm just going to guess. And students at this age and children at this age absolutely are going to avoid reading out loud. So that's where you may start, especially when they're getting older, you may start seeing your child or other children act out because they're avoiding wanting to read aloud in class. What about speaking? What does it look like for speaking? Well, children at this large kind of age group, 2nd to 12th, they're going to struggle to find a specific word. And so instead, if they're trying to search for the word they're trying to say, they may just say stuff or thing, or they may say something that's more generic without naming the actual object, because they can't pull it out readily, real quickly to get that out to people. There may be some pauses or some hesitance. There may be a lot of before they speak, because they're trying to give themselves time. Their brain is trying to process before they speak. And oftentimes, children will also confuse words. So they may say tornado, but really mean volcano. They may substitute lotion for ocean because it sounds so similar. And in their mind, they don't have that meaning of that word wrapped around the sounds of that word. And if the words are complicated or long or unfamiliar, they will also have trouble pronouncing. And so many times there'll be that mispronunciation of a long word. And children also seem to need extra time to respond to questions. So if they're asked a question, sometimes it may take a little bit of a pause, before they can process what it is the person's asking for. And then their brain is trying to process how to actually form those words to speak back to the person. I mean, I can remember that, it was a while back, but for a while our daughter would say, Mom, can I ask you a question? And I'd be like, yeah. And then she also would ask me, she would say, Mom, I need to tell you something. And I remember catching myself saying to my husband, why does she just ask me? Why do I have this little piece before every time I need to tell you something, or, hey, can I ask you a question? And then once I realized, we went through some additional evaluations, and I realized that was the way that her brain gave her a pause, gave her a moment, gave her that extra time to get her thoughts together. She doesn't really even, I wouldn't think she probably realizes she even does it. It's just something her brain does automatically to give her brain a second. And what about at school? What about life in general? In general, students will struggle to finish tests on time because remember, up to third grade, children are learning to read, but then it flips and they read to learn. So if they can't read, then they're going to struggle in social studies. They're going to struggle in science. And believe it or not, they're going to struggle in math because there's lots of reading problems in math. So when you think about that, they may struggle to finish tests on time. And they find extreme difficulty sometimes in learning a foreign language. Their spelling is really poor. Their handwriting is really messy. And the piece that is also unfortunate is at this time you'll start seeing low self-esteem. And that may not be immediately visible, but you'll start seeing that as the child goes along, that they'll start really taking a hit from their self-esteem. But let's talk about the strengths. Again, you're going to see just excellent thinking skills, the reasoning, the imagination. They're able to learn that just amazing imagination on things as well. And they also are learning that is what's accomplished best through meaning rather than rote memorization. So they like to talk about things. They're able to see a big picture. And again, we talked about this earlier, a high level of understanding and comprehension of what is read to the student or read to the child. And improvement, really comes in those areas of interest because as they're specialized and focused, they can really talk about that vocabulary. And sometimes that's more of a limited vocabulary than when they're reading, other subject area. And their listening vocabulary can be very sophisticated as well. And they also find that children excel in areas that are not dependent on reading. This makes sense, right? Like they excel in computers and the arts and subjects like philosophy and biology and neuroscience and creative writing and math, that because it's not completely dependent on reading, those are areas that children excel in. All right, let's talk for a few minutes about young adults and adults, because I know for us, for many families, they too don't have dyslexia on their radar. And so they may start finding that they too have some of these traits. So let me read a couple to you just so this will give you more of an idea about what may be going on in your immediate family, with the adults in your life, with yourself, with your siblings, with your parents, with your grandparents. However that may look, but it may help you identify, oh, yes, we definitely had dyslexia in our family. So let's talk about, and you may have young adults that are in college that you didn't realize. So let's talk a little bit about the reading. So there's a childhood history of reading and spelling difficulties. Did someone in your family, does your college student, did they struggle as a child learning to read and spell? And those reading skills may have developed over time, but reading still requires great effort and is done at a slow pace. And these young adults and adults rarely read for pleasure. They're just not interested in that because remember, this is the group of people that have probably not been remediated. It is kind of, because this again is about signs of dyslexia. And they're slow to reading most materials. Like if they've got to read, books or manuals at work, they're slow to read those things. And they really just avoid to read out loud, although that might not happen very often. But there could be times that they have to read things out loud and they really avoid situations where that may happen. And with speaking, there's a lack of fluency. So you may hear ums or, imprecise language, some general just anxiety around speaking. They also often mispronounce names of people and places incorrectly. And they might just trip over parts of words. And sometimes there's some confusion over names that sound alike too, that they might not get the people's names right as well. Struggle continues with retrieving words. And so frequently they may do what Dr. Shaywitz calls, to kind of, it's on the tip of their tongue kind of moments. They just struggle to retrieve those words and they know it. It's just right there, but they just can't get it. This individual rarely will have a fast response in a conversation, and they struggle when someone puts them on the spot to respond. And they also avoid saying words that might be mispronounced. So if there's a word and they're like, then they may just completely use a different word that means the same thing. And what about school? What about school for young adults and life in general? As you think about young adults, that are in college, despite some good grades that they may have figured out how to kind of work through this as far as what they need to do to be successful, then they often still may say that they're stupid, or they're concerned that their peers think that they're stupid. They, may find themselves being penalized for multiple choice tests because they just don't have time to read all the material and answer all those questions. And you'll also find that frequently, especially in those college age years, that they'll sacrifice social life, maybe even in high school, for studying because it takes them that much longer. And they also struggle with extreme fatigue when reading. I mean, reading is just exhausting when you've not broken the code and that you don't know how to pull those sounds apart. It can be exhausting. And thinking of a young adult who may be in the last years of high school or in college, or even maybe at a new job, there may be a lot of reading of new material, and especially in college, there may be a lot of it. And so it can really cause some fatigue. And anything that's written down, tasks that have to be written down, sometimes you'll see some poor performance there as well. Let's talk again about the strengths, though. For young adults and adults, they maintain strengths that we talked about in those early years. They have a high capacity to learn, and they will show noticeable differences when given additional time, especially on multiple choice examinations. They demonstrate excellence when focused on highly specialized areas. Like we talked about before, you'll find dyslexics are drawn to science, architecture. They may be drawn to the law or medicine, the areas that they can get highly specialized in and really use their creativity and also use those high-level thinking skills. And they really have excellent writing skills if they focus on the content and not on the spelling. So what's amazing now is we have so many assistive technology. We have so many technology tools at our disposal where spelling may, and probably is right now and will continue to be, not that big of a deal because we have devices that will help us. We can ask Alexa, we can ask Siri, we can ask them how to spell something and they'll spell it for us. And, if you think about these young adults and even yourself as an adult, highly articulate. I mean, when expressing ideas and feelings, exceptionally empathetic and warm toward others and situations. That's one of the things I learned when I was studying about the dyslexics who are entrepreneurs. One of the things that makes them so successful is they have that exceptional empathy skill, and they're able to really feel the room and know when something's going wrong or something's going right, and to really work closely with their employees and make that not only do they progress from a success standpoint, but they're also able to really be in tune with the people that work with them. And another piece too you can think about is, if you think about, I was just thinking as I was paused there for a moment, when you think about entrepreneurs that comes to mind, but even just business or any type of career, there really is, if you look around and really do a little bit of research about successful dyslexics, and you probably have successful dyslexics even in your life, in your schools, in your teachers, in your physicians, and people in your household, they're really outside of the box thinkers, and they can see the big picture. And another piece that I found when I was researching entrepreneurs is they are noticeably resilient. And you know why that is? Because if you think about it, as dyslexics, they have to embrace failure. They're going to experience failure, sometimes daily. And learning early on had to have resilience through that and not take that personally and know that it's part of the learning process. Then that makes for some amazing inventors. That makes for some amazing lawyers and physicians and business owners. The list goes on and on. Now, if you want to learn more about Dr. Shaywitz's research, be sure to go to today's show notes. I've got links for the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, and I also have links to Dr. Shaywitz's book, Overcoming Dyslexia. I do want to share just a few more things with you before we depart today. There are some related disorders, which are sometimes called coexisting or comorbidity disorders that go along with dyslexia. I'm going to talk about coexisting. So if your child has dyslexia, or you suspect that they do, sometimes they get stalled or get stuck in their remediation of learning to read, and it can be because some of these other coexisting disorders are taking priority, and those pieces need to be addressed so that your child can continue through the remediation or either even working side by side with both pieces. So I'm going to run through real quickly the ones I'm going to share with you. Dysgraphia, dyscalculia, I never can say that right. This is the math one. Dyspraxia, ADHD, ADD, and executive functioning. Now, there can be others. These are just the highlights that came off the International Dyslexia Association's page. These are the ones that most people see as coexisting, if there is a coexisting, but there can also be things like for us, there could be speech language pieces. There can be other pieces. I just want you to know that there are other pieces to be considered, because I know not too long ago, someone told me I didn't even know dysgraphia was a thing. Like, what is that? And so some of the pieces we're about to talk about are not considered dyslexia, because dyslexia is specific to, the ability to read. These other pieces have to do with other areas. So let's just jump in. So for example, with dysgraphia is about handwriting. The child can be poor or slow, well, even adults. The individual that has dysgraphia can be poor or slow with their handwriting, messy and have unorganized papers, difficulty copying, poor fine motor skills, and difficulty remembering the kinesthetic movements to form letters correctly. So when you're thinking about your child and if they're having trouble, for us it's even holding the pencil correctly or what they, deem to be correctly, those pieces, can fall into place to form or to have a diagnosis of dysgraphia. And that can also kind of compound the dyslexia. And so that's something to be aware of, that there is something called dysgraphia. Dyscalculia, I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right. I apologize. But anyway, dyscalculia is the math disorder, and it is difficulty in counting accurately. It may, students may misread numbers. There's this difficulty in retrieving math facts, this difficulty in copying math problems and organizing written work. There can be many calculation errors and difficulty retaining math vocabulary concepts. Another that you may see or hear about is dyspraxia. This is about motor skills. This is about difficulty planning and coordinating body movements, difficulty coordinating facial movements to produce sounds. So we were talking about earlier about speech language. Sometimes speech language could be dyspraxia. And so that's something to be on your radar as well, if that's something that sounds familiar to you that you're seeing. And I'm sure we're all familiar with attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which has to do with a child's attention. So it's that inattentive, it's that distractibility, the impulsivity, the hyperactivity. Sometimes you'll see that paired with the dyslexia, and so that makes it even more difficult for the child. Another piece that we see a lot with dyslexics that I've seen is executive functioning, which really has to do with the child's ability to organize and have that organizational piece. So if your child loses papers, they don't get things in the backpack, they have a poor sense of time, you ask them where the homework is, they don't know where the homework is, you ask them to do their homework, they don't, what? They have a messy desk. They get overwhelmed by too much input and they work slowly. So with those executive functioning pieces, if you see that happening at home, I was talking to a mom a few days ago about this. It could be even with chores. You need to break those down. Go make your bed. They make their bed. They come back. You give them another chore. But to give them 4 or 5 chores may be overwhelming and they may not do any of them. Same thing with homework. You may want to break those pieces down and do one piece at a time so that they don't get overwhelmed with it. Now, from the signs of dyslexia that I've shared with you today, you've probably heard a few themes. You've heard high-level thinking strengths throughout and a constant struggle to retrieve spoken words easily. All right, let me say that again. So today you probably heard some themes. The theme of high-level thinking strengths, really throughout all the ages, right? And a constant struggle to retrieve spoken words easily. You may even find that you do some of these things. When you can't remember how to spell or pronounce a word when speaking or writing, do you just choose another one? Our children are bright, and they will find ways to work with their brains. As our kiddos transition from third grade, like I said earlier, where education's been focused on learning to read, and after third grade, where the focus shifts to reading to learn, we can help our kiddos learn to embrace their dyslexia and learn how to break the code to learn to read. It won't be overnight, but you're listening today because you are ready for a change. Early identification is essential for dyslexics. But we didn't know. We didn't know that these signs were out there. We didn't have them on our radar. You know now what to watch for, so you can ask the questions earlier. Or maybe you need to ask the questions now. Don't wait. Act. Request the evaluation from your school or seek an evaluation with a licensed child psychologist if you have a history of dyslexia or you have a history of struggling to read early on in childhood from people in your family, or you have concerns about your child's reading progress, and so you want them to be able to examine those and tell you the nature of those difficulties. Now, there is a screener that is on the International Dyslexia Association's page. I'm going to link to that in the show notes. They recommend that you can take that screener. Now, keep in mind, this is not an evaluation, but it is a screener for ages 6 to 18. And it will test, it's just a few questions, but they're going to kind of assess where your child may fall and whether or not there is a minimal risk, moderate, or significant risk of dyslexia. And then from there, you can seek, further evaluation. But this does not constitute, they say, a formal evaluation or diagnosis. But it is research-based, it's reliable and valid. So I want to just read very quickly these couple of statements, though. So when you go to the link in the show notes, you'll see the assessment. You can click it right on the screen, and it will immediately tell you where you fall, and where your child falls, rather. And then they will tell you more information. Your child's at significant risk. This is what you should do. And they kind of walk you through that. But I want you to have these in your mind. You're going to score these on the sheet as far as how frequently do they happen, but I want you to have an idea of what you're looking for. The child has difficulty with spelling, has had difficulty learning letter names, has had difficulty learning phonics. Phonics is sounding out the words. They read slowly. They read below grade level. The student requires extra help in school because of problems with reading and spelling. Those are the 6 questions that are going to ask you, and they're going to ask, that assessment's going to ask how frequently you see those things. And then it's going to give you a score, which will help you identify whether or not you want to go forward with a request for evaluation. Whew, that was a lot, right? So do you want clarity as to what next steps to take once your child has been identified with dyslexia? Do you want a master plan, but you're just not sure where to start? Do you want to learn from someone who has been there and understands the feeling of relief when you get that identification, and at the same time not knowing which direction to go first? Then, my friend, I'm your guide, your mentor, your bestie, and your cheerleader on this journey. My course, Dyslexia Battle Blueprint, is what you need when you start your journey. You will find clarity on dyslexia. You will find clarity on what is needed for next steps. You will plan your next steps. We'll do that together. And then you'll take those steps and implement and monitor them in your Dyslexia Battle Blueprint. Go to dyslexiamomlife.com to learn more about the course and how I can guide you through raising a child who thrives with dyslexia. I'll be back here on Monday. I hope you will join me. Have an amazing week. You got this.